For the record, will you please state your name and spell your last name?
Mary, middle initial K, last name Mainland, Mainland.
And Dr. Mainland, by whom are you employed?
The County of Kenosha.
In what capacity?
I serve as the medical examiner.
And what does a medical examiner do?
A medical examiner is charged with investigating deaths that may be unusual, sudden, unexpected, suspicious, violent, and things of that nature. And then investigates those deaths and determines the cause and manner.
And doctor, what sort of education and training do you have which qualifies you for that position?
I have a medical degree, an MD, a residency in pathology, anatomic and clinical pathology, and then post-residency training in forensic pathology.
And you're a medical doctor?
Yes, sir.
And where did you get your degree in medicine?
At the Medical College of Wisconsin.
And doctor, then did you do postgraduate training or post-medical school training in the field of pathology?
Yes.
And describe, if you will, what you did in that area.
When I was in my pathology residency, the requirement was 5 years. And for those, I spent doing general anatomic and clinical pathology. The 5th year was kind of an optional year at that time. Not optional, but you could choose whatever you'd like to, delve into. And so I chose to spend that at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's office. That was my residency training.
So tell the jury, if you will, the difference between a forensic pathologist and a general or anatomic pathologist.
Well, anatomic pathology is a study of body organs and systems and their diseases. Forensic pathology gets to deal more with things like injury, especially violent injury. We have the background a regular pathologist would have. A regular pathologist would tend to work in a hospital laboratory, examine specimens from the operating room or biopsies from a clinic or whatever. Our bread and butter is autopsies and determining cause and manner of death.
And what things do you look at? I mean, certainly you examine the body in an autopsy, correct?
Yes.
What other things does a forensic pathologist look at in determining the cause of death besides just looking at the body?
We take all the facts that are available to us into consideration. When a doctor examines a patient, first thing you go to the doctor, the first thing the doctor does is take what's called a history. Doctor's going to ask you questions. We can't ask questions of the deceased, so we investigate by other means. We talk to others who were around at the time, family, friends, maybe that's that person's physician if they had one, police, anybody that can provide us with information that might help us in determining the cause and manner of death.
Now, doctor, is there any board which certifies forensic pathologists?
Yes.
Are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
And tell us what that entails.
To be board certified in forensic pathology, you first need to be board certified in anatomic pathology. Clinical pathology is not a requirement for forensic, but I do have that one too. So there's a series there's 2 exams you take for that, for anatomic, and I took clinical pathology. And after post-residency training in forensic pathology, there's another exam that you sit for.
And so you sat for the board certification for clinical pathology?
Yes.
And you're board certified as a clinical pathologist?
Yes.
And you sat for the board certification for an anatomic pathologist?
Yes.
And you're board certified as an anatomic pathologist?
Yes.
And you sat for the exam for forensic pathology?
Yes.
And you're board certified as a forensic pathologist?
Yes.
Now, in your field as a pathologist, do you also have occasion to work in the field of toxicology as well?
Yes, we routinely rely on toxicology results when we, for our cases.
So you're experienced in reading what toxicologists report to you and reading their findings?
Yes.
Now, doctor, at the time that Julie Jensen was found dead in Kenosha County, you weren't the medical examiner back then, were you?
No.
When did you become the Kenosha County medical examiner?
If I remember right, I was hired in late January of 2005.
And in sometime shortly after you were hired in January of 2005, somebody came and talked to you about the Julie Jensen homicide investigation, correct?
Yes.
And who was that person?
That would be you.
And what did I ask you to do?
You asked me to look it over and see what I thought the cause and manner of death would be.
What did you look at?
I looked at, I have it all up here with me. I looked at the autopsy protocol, which is the report generated by the pathologist who actually did the autopsy. I looked at microscopic slides. I looked at autopsy photographs. I looked at police reports, witness statements. I looked at toxicology. I looked at, I'm going too fast, huh? Some people are writing. I looked at slides of tissues under the microscope. I may be forgetting something here.
Well,
so it may not all be inclusive.
Now, and what was your purpose in looking at all of that stuff?
To get the best idea I could of the cause and manner of death.
Now let's talk about that. You speak of cause and manner of death. What's the difference between cause of death and manner of death?
Yeah. The cause of death is pretty easy to understand. It's the thing that killed the person. So cancer, gunshot wound to the chest, hanging, pneumonia, heart attack, etc. You get the picture. That's the cause of death.
And what's the manner of death?
The manner of death refers to the how. And in Wisconsin, on the death certificate, we have choices: natural, suicide, homicide, accidental, and undetermined. There's also a pending classification that we can put a case into if we're not sure and we need to study it further, because the death certificate needs to be signed within a certain number of days after someone dies.
Now, Dr. Mainland, after examining all of the items that you've examined in this case, have you come to an opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, as to the cause and the manner of death of Julie Jensen?
Yes, I have.
What is your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, as to the cause of Julie Jensen's death?
The cause of death is ethylene glycol poisoning with probable terminal asphyxia.
And what would the manner of death be?
Homicide.
Now, doctor, you never actually examined the body of Julie Jensen, did you?
No, I did not.
What did you look at when you were trying to determine what had happened to the person of Julie Jensen?
All the things that I just described: autopsy protocol, photographs, microscopic slides.
And did you also make some of your own slides?
Yes, I did.
Just to verify that what you were looking at in the other slides was the same things you would find?
Yes.
And when you verify, what did you find when you compared the slides that you'd created to the slides that Dr. Lavin had created?
They were similar.
Now, you said that there was ethylene glycol poisoning. And what evidence was it that you recovered or that you observed that caused you to conclude that Julie Jensen had suffered from ethylene glycol poisoning?
Well, ethylene glycol should not be found in the human body anytime. If it's detected in the human body, the only way you're going to find it in the human body is if somebody was poisoned, either accidentally on purpose or on purpose. So the toxicology report revealed that there was indeed ethylene glycol in Mrs. Jensen's blood, in her urine, in her stomach contents, and then additional testing in her liver and in her brain. The tissue findings upon microscopic examination, particularly of the kidney, were specific also. for ethylene glycol poisoning.
Now, Doctor, were photographs made of these slides that were examined under electron microscope?
They weren't examined under an electron microscope. They were examined under an ordinary microscope. Okay. Yes, there were photographs made.
I show these items in marked Exhibit S216, actually S211 through 216. I ask you to take a look at those and see if you can identify those.
These are photographs of the slides taken by Dr. Lavin, taken from the tissue that Dr. Lavin had made into slides of Julie Jensen's kidneys.
No. And do these photographs truly and accurately portray the findings on those slides?
Yes.
Your Honor, request that States Exhibits 211 through 216 be received into evidence, subject to cross-examination.
Is there objection?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the answer. Were these photographs taken by Dr. Lavin?
Yes. I didn't make that very clear. I'm sorry. The photographs were taken by Dr. Lavin off of her slides.
And do those photographs truly and accurately portray the slides as you saw them?
Yes.
Well, I have Sixth Amendment and hearsay questions unless Dr. Lavin's testifying.
I'll defer ruling on your motion.
Well, Your Honor, I think I've laid the foundation for a photograph to come into evidence. This witness identified the original, identified the photograph as accurately reflecting the original. So I think that's the foundation for a photograph.
Well, the problem is that the original has to be credited.
Okay. I thought I'd ask you this, but I'll ask you again. Dr. Mainland, did you then do your own, examine your own tissue samples or tissue samples of Julie Jensen that you obtained yourself?
Yes, I did.
And did you examine the samples that you obtained yourself under a microscope?
Yes, I did.
And did the tissue samples you examined under a microscope, were they the same, did you come up with the same findings, the same results as Dr. Lavin's?
Yes.
I once again moved Exhibits 211 and 216 into evidence.
Two things, Judge. I thought I understood her initial testimony to be that they were similar. Second, the witness hasn't testified to this, but my understanding would be there'd be a number of years that passed in between the time of the photographs and the time they were examined by Dr. Mainland.
That's for cross-examination. Subject to cross-examination, they'll be received.
You got to turn on that. You hear that? Turn it up there. There we go. I'm going to show you this item that has been marked as States Exhibit 211. See, I'm going to pull this back a little bit so that you can see the whole photograph. Now, can you tell the jury what Exhibit 211 represents, and I'll get you a laser pointer if you need one.
Oh, wow.
We're all high tech here. There we go. I don't know if that shows up there though very well.
Yeah, but
I can point.
Well, here, let's try this laser pointer. Maybe this one works better. Yeah, I think this one works better. So use that laser pointer.
If you have any problems, I'll get up and point. I don't mind. The question was what this depicts?
Yeah, what is that?
This is a slide taken through the microscope, a picture taken through the microscope of a glass slide with a very thin layer of kidney tissue on it, and it's been stained for the purpose of being able to look at it. And this was from Mrs. Jensen's kidney. And
can you tell me what I've heard reference to kidney tubule.
Yes.
What is the kidney tubule, and where is it on that?
Okay, kidney tubules are they're these kind of oval or round structures. There's kind of an elongated one, and it's exactly what they are. Is they're tubes. They're long tubes, but they appear round in some areas like this, and longer in some areas like this because, like a piece of spaghetti, they're either cut like, you can see it long, or you can cut it cross section and look at it end on. So that's why they have different shapes. But to make it simple, the tubules are where urine is made.
Now, What is that, this, oh, here, I'm putting it in my finger. What is this thing right here, that part right there? Can you tell us what that is?
That is a calcium oxalate crystal.
Now, can you tell the jury how what a calcium oxalate crystal is and how it would end up in the kidney?
Hey, calcium oxalate crystals can form when oxalic acid is consumed and it combines with calcium that's normally in the body. And when those two combine, they form a solid compound, a crystalline compound, and it typically gets deposited and stuck like this in the tubules of the kidney.
Now, what causes the formation of oxalic acid? What's the most typical or almost exclusive cause of the formation of oxalic acid crystals in the kidneys in the human body?
Can I have just clarification that ended up being kind of a compound? It was typical and then it was or almost exclusive.
Well, why don't I'll withdraw that question. I'll try to do it more elegantly. Okay, it's what causes the formation of oxalic acid crystals in the kidney tubules of a human body?
There are a number of things that can do it. Things that you eat. If you eat like a bushel of rhubarb, you might end up with a few oxalic acid crystals in your kidneys. There are foods and things that contain high amounts of oxalate. There are metabolic disorders that can cause the body itself to produce too much oxalate. And then there's poisoning.
What poisoning would cause the formation of oxalic acid crystals in the kidney?
Either oxalic acid poisoning or ethylene glycol poisoning,
Only those two things.
as far as I'm aware.
Now, directing your attention to Exhibit 212. What does that exhibit show?
Again, it shows the kidney tubules. Here you are, here they are in cross-section, kind of round. And here's a nice long cut of one right down. There's the middle, there's the opening. And again, there are crystals in here. And it looks a little different on this photo because it's shot under a different kind of light. It's shot under polarized light, and so it's a little shinier on this picture, but it's the same thing.
And directing your attention to Exhibit 216. What does 216 show?
That's another picture of kidney. It's a little, the microscope is backed off a little further, so the tubules here look a little smaller. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. This, incidentally, is a structure that initially filters the blood into urine, but all these shiny white things are oxalic acid crystals, or I'm sorry, calcium oxalate crystals.
And I show this item is marked as Exhibit 213, and what is that?
It's the same thing with at a closer up view. We saw something similar to that, the picture before last. Kidney tubules.
Now, doctor, you indicated that oxalic acid or oxalic acid poisoning can cause the formation of these crystals, and that ethylene glycol poisoning can cause the formation of these crystals. And do you have an opinion to a reasonable medical certainty as to which of those two are responsible for the oxalic acid crystals that you found in Julie Jensen's kidneys?
Yes, I do.
And what is that opinion?
It was ethylene glycol,
And why do you say that?
because there was ethylene glycol found in Mrs. Jensen's system at the time of her death.
In her blood,
Yes,
in her gastric contents,
yes,
and in her urine?
yes.
Now, Is there any other reasonable explanation for the presence of oxalic acid crystals in Julie Jensen's blood, urine, the oxalic acid crystals in her kidneys, other than ethylene glycol poisoning, given the history and the facts that you know about this case?
No.
Now, Doctor, you also have offered the opinion that the immediate cause of death could have been asphyxia also.
Yes.
And explain to the jury, if you will, the relationship between the ethylene glycol poisoning and the asphyxia, and how you came to that conclusion.
Judge, I do object under 971-23 notice grounds.
I don't know the... You want to respond?
Well, Your Honor, first of all, I believe Dr. Mainland did testify at the forfeiture hearing, but of course that was before Aaron Dillard had provided a statement, and she's now testifying based to some extent upon what Aaron Dillard told her. So we have provided defense counsel with...
You can stop. Overall.
So, well, let's go back to there was a hearing earlier this year, or I'm sorry, in 2007, and you testified in that case, correct?
Yes.
At that time. And at that time, what was your opinion concerning the cause of death?
I opined that Mrs. Jensen's death was caused by ethylene glycol poisoning and that the manner was homicide.
And at that time, you asked if you could rule out asphyxia being a contributing factor, or do you recall being asked that?
I remember discussing asphyxia, yes.
And could you rule that out at that time or not?
I don't remember what my exact words were, but I think I said something like...
It's not so much what you said, as you're sitting here now today, do you remember at that time, would you have been able to rule out asphyxia?
No.
Okay. But now you're offering asphyxia as a cause of death in this case,
Yes.
to a reasonable medical certainty.
Yes.
And why is that?
Because of a statement made by Aaron Dillard that was attributed to Mark Jensen.
Well, let's assume for a moment that Aaron Dillard is just the most vile liar on the face of the planet, and his testimony is bought and paid for. Why would you attach any significance to what Aaron Dillard would have to say about the cause of death in this case?
In Aaron Dillard's statement, he said a few other things that were not public knowledge, and to my mind, could have only come from one source.
What source?
Mark Jensen.
Well, the person who murdered Julie Jensen.
Yes.
Now, at the time that you offered the opinion, back in August or whenever it was of 2007, that Julie Jensen died of ethylene glycol poisoning, there were some findings in the autopsy protocol that you couldn't explain, correct?
There were some findings that we discussed that I said were non-specific, yes.
And you didn't know what their significance were.
That's fair to say.
So let's tell the jury what some of those findings were that were unexplained by the ethylene glycol poisoning death.
Yeah, there were some hemorrhages in the neck area, and we'll discuss those later, I'm sure. There was some bruising along the rib cage. There was some bruising on the buttock, one of the buttocks. And remind me if I'm forgetting anything.
Well, we'll come to that later, but tell me this, concerning the bruising along the rib cage, there was no external bruising along the rib cage, was there?
No, not that was noted.
The bruising that was described on the rib cage, where did you read in the autopsy protocol that the bruising along the rib cage was noted?
I think it was probably under the heading of internal evidence of injury after the body was opened and the muscles along the ribs were looked at.
And I'm looking for the letter that Aaron Dillard wrote to his attorney, so I don't know what exhibit number that would be.
That's not
134.
It's not as big in its entirety.
I wasn't going to show it in its entirety, I just wanted to get to the right part.
It's either 134 or 139.
134. Yeah, let's skip that. 134. It's getting down here. That's not it. No, I'm looking for the letter that he wrote, and I guess is this photograph was. If it's 134, then be further up. So. There it is. So, you were aware of this portion of the statement that Aaron Dillard provided? He said he went out, kids, school, some check thing, and came home. He said she was breathing better, and he was scared she was not going to die before the kids got home. They would force him to call an ambulance. He said she was sound asleep and very non-responsive. Said she was sleeping on her back, and he rolled her over a bit, and she did not wake up. So he rolled her over in her face, with her face in her pillow. He thought that would make it hard for her to breathe. He left her for a bit and came back, and she was still alive. Then he got on top of her and pushed her head, neck into the pillow, and sat on her back so she could not breathe. And she died, and he went to work. Now, doctor, does that description of the last moments of Julie Jensen's life explain to you any autopsy findings or any findings of the autopsy protocol?
I think the one thing that that description matches up best with is the hemorrhages along the rib cage.
Now, doctor, you've had occasion, you had occasion to examine the photographs that were taken at the autopsy of Julie Jensen?
Yes.
I'm going to show you this photograph that has been marked as State's Exhibit 210. And I want you to describe what that photograph portrays.
Right, this is a picture of Mrs. Jensen's body at autopsy. The Y incision has already been made, as you probably mostly know. We cut like this, and down like this.
And I'd request the record show, Your Honor, the witness is indicating from shoulder to shoulder down to the sternum and then down from the sternum?
Yes. In order to expose the rib cage underneath and the abdominal organs. So the Y incision has already been made. The tissue is reflected back. The ribs and the muscles attached to them are exposed. And there are some findings on the rib cage.
No. And so I apologize in advance to the jury, and I warned the jury that this is evidence that is, we think, important in this case. I'm going to now, I request Exhibit 210 be received into evidence subject to cross-examination.
Any objection?
No.
Proceed.
Now, do you have your pointer there, doctor?
Yes.
Can you point to the injuries along the rib cage that you're referring to?
Okay, if you look at these areas that are darker than the others, this, and this, those are dark because they're hemorrhage, they're blood, they're bruises, and those are the injuries I was referring to.
Thank you, doctor. Now, I need the photograph of Julie in bed, so I don't know what exhibit number that would be. Doctor, I show this photo that has been marked as State's Exhibit S12. And I ask you to note the location and the positioning of Julie Jensen's left arm.
Yes.
And can you tell us how the positioning of her left arm along the rib cage lines up with the injuries that you just showed the jury on Julie Jensen's rib cage?
As you don't see her entire left arm, but you see that it crosses her body in the front, and she's lying on top of it. And in order to cross the body, it's got to lie on top of the rib cage. And if there were pressure on that arm, or that chest into that arm, it could easily have caused those hemorrhages or those bruises that we saw. And
So if a person, say the size of Mark Jensen here, was sitting on Julie Jensen's back there while he was pushing her face into the pillow, you would expect to find the injuries of the sort that you just saw in the photograph of the rib cage. Let me get the exhibit number, Exhibit S210.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I would expect to find them, but I would say that if I found them, they would be consistent with that history.
And you did find them.
Dr. Chambliss found them.
And you've just observed them, and do they line up with where Julie Jensen's arm is displayed in that photograph?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to actually show you the photograph itself because I want to ask you, looking at her left hand there, it seems like the fingers are darker color than the rest of her hand. Does that seem that way to you as well?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury why that is?
That, to me, looks like what we call postmortem lividity, Lividity. What that is pooling. The blood pools after death. And whatever area or surface of the body is downward, the blood kind of, just gravitates down that way. And so her hand is kind of hanging off the edge of the bed, like this. Well, you saw it. And so the blood is pooling in her hand.
And that's a process that commences at death?
Sometimes it even begins before death.
And so the lividity or the collection, the pooling of the blood in her fingers like that, does that indicate to you that her hand was like that for some period of time?
Yes, it would.
So in other words, the position of the body, the pooling of the blood in the hand would indicate that the position of the body had not been changed much since her death.
Objection, leading.
State.
Well, do you have any opinion as to what the pooling of the blood in the hand can tell you with respect to whether or not that her body had been altered or moved from the time of her death?
I would favor that. I would favor that it had not been moved. Had it been moved after her death, it would have had to have been moved before the lividity set in.
Now, doctor, I'm going to get you the autopsy protocol. Let's see. With Tammy's help, if she can help me find it here. Should be near the top of the list, I would think. Oh, here it is, S7. I'm going to show this photograph, or I'm sorry, this document has been marked as State's Exhibit S7, and ask if you can tell me what that is.
This is a copy of the autopsy protocol that Dr. Chambliss prepared in the case of Julie Jensen.
And going through that, and I just want you to read through that autopsy protocol and tell me whether or not there are any other findings in that autopsy protocol which are unexplained simply by an ethylene glycol poisoning, but which may be consistent with an asphyxia death. Particularly an asphyxia death as described by Aaron Dillard.
But if you want me to just list the injuries that were described, I mean.
Well,
we
just
can
list
discuss
the
them
injuries that were
individually.
described that are not explained by an ethylene glycol death, but which are consistent with an asphyxia death as described by Aaron Dillard.
All right, there are 2 bruises on the right buttock that are described. That would be consistent if somebody was on top of her. There's a bruise on the right shin that I'm not going to commit to one way or another. He describes a superficial abrasion on the front of the neck. I'm not going to put really much stock in that. And under the internal examination, he describes the hemorrhage on the ribs. He describes, let's see. It's going to take a while. I'm reading it like instructed.
Well, we've been at it for a couple of weeks. I guess another 10 minutes isn't going to kill us.
All right, hang on. Okay, there. He puts things in different places than I do, so that's what took me a while. He describes some hemorrhage in the back of the neck, or in the back of the, I want to say the larynx, not the outside of the neck, but inside. And I'm sure we'll discuss that at length.
Maybe we will, but let's go. Keep going. And we'll go, I want you to list the injuries that are consistent with an asphyxia death as described by Aaron Dillard in that autopsy protocol. And once you've listed them all, then we'll go back through them one by one, okay?
Sure. The bruising on the buttock, the bruising along the rib cage, and the hemorrhage, possibly the hemorrhaging in the back of the neck.
I don't recall anything about back of the neck. Did he describe back of the neck, or what did he say?
The back of the larynx, I'm sorry.
Okay. So, let's going to the beginning. Now this, under external evidence of injury, this number 1 thing, it describes an 8 by 2 centimeter horizontally directed bruise. Is that what you were talking about, that bruise in the buttocks?
Yes.
Okay, now explain how that could possibly be consistent or inconsistent with the cause of death as described by Aaron Dillard?
Well, I think I just kind of indicated it a minute ago, but if an assailant were sitting on top of the victim and pushing her chest and head into the pillow, it could have been caused by, part of the assailant's body.
Okay. And you've already described the small amount of hemorrhage involving the soft tissues and muscles attached to the left, second, third, and fourth ribs anteriorly.
Yes.
Correct? That's what we just showed the jury in the photograph?
Yes.
Now, he indicates here there are numerous petechiae over the outer surface of the lower lobe of the left lung, the left side of the pericardial sac, and the front and back of the heart, and the top of the right leaflet of the diaphragm. Now, is that consistent or inconsistent with the manner, the description of the death is provided by Aaron Dillard, or are those findings nonspecific in one way or the other?
I consider them nonspecific.
And then looking at, as I recall, something there about the hypopharyngeal muscle or
Yeah,
something.
that's what I was.
That's the neck organ?
No, he describes it under the gastrointestinal system. That's what took me so long to find it.
Because you would have put it with the neck, or where would you
Yes.
put it? Yeah, because isn't it up here?
Everybody does their thing a little bit differently.
Just point to where the hypopharyngeal thing is.
All right, in here, but like back along your spine. If you can imagine I'm a doctor and I can't remember what the word is. If you can imagine your esophagus, your mouth where it connects to your esophagus and the food going down, that area.
Okay.
And, your esophagus, it kind of sits right along your spine.
So under the gastrointestinal system, he writes, there is hemorrhage of the mucosa of the hypopharyngeal muscles.
Slower.
I'm sorry. There is hemorrhage of the mucosa of the hypopharyngeal, hypopharyngeal muscles on the upper back of the thyroid cartilage of the larynx near the, what's that?
Aryepiglottic, Aryepiglottic.
Folds. Now, would that be consistent or inconsistent or nonspecific with respect to the manner of death as described by Aaron Dillard?
If it's true about, if the part about the neck being pushed into the pillow, it would be consistent. Otherwise, I would say it's non-specific.
Well, let's go back to what, and again, of course, I'm not vouching for Aaron Dillard as being truthful or untruthful, but let's see what he wrote. He said she was sound asleep and very non-responsive, said she was sleeping on her back, and he rolled...
Ask, Mr. Jamboys has already read this once today. And
Just show it to the doctor.
Well, directing your attention to right there, where it's in the sense where then he got...
I see it.
And what does it say?
It says, then he got on top of her and pushed her head, and then there's the word neck in parentheses into the pillow and sat on her back.
Now, Doctor, this is a letter that was written by Aaron Dillard to Gretchen Rosenke sometime, I don't know, August or September, something like that. Have you ever, before you read that letter, ever offered an opinion about how the injury to the hypopharyngeal mucosa around the hypopharyngeal muscle was consistent with somebody shoving their neck into Julie Jensen's neck into a pillow?
We didn't talk about it that specifically at the hearing last summer.
You've never written that down anywhere before?
No.
objection assumes that you wrote any report.
Well, the objection's overruled.
Now, let's also look at looking for the, do I have the photo up there of Julie Jensen in bed?
Yes, I think so.
Ah, yes. Now, doctor, as a forensic pathologist, you frequently go to crime scenes, don't you?
Yes,
You frequently examine the bodies at the crime scenes.
yes.
Now, looking at this photo of Julie Jensen, Now that you've heard the description from Erin Dillard about how she had been sleeping on her back soundly, and she was rolled over, looking at the way the left arm is arrayed beneath the body in that fashion, does that look like the position somebody would be in when they're just sleeping on their own? Or does that look like a position that was more consistent with somebody sleeping on their back and being rolled over by some other force?
People sleep in weird ways, and I really don't want to say it's more consistent with one or the other. It's certainly consistent with somebody being rolled over that way.
Now, and you've never written any report indicating that the arm beneath Julie Jensen's body, her left arm, corresponds extremely well with the hemorrhaging along the rib cage of Julie Jensen as found at autopsy, have you?
No.
So there'd be no way for Erin Dillard or any other person to have gotten that information. Well, can you think?
First of all, that's leading and suggestive, and secondly, it's why is her opinion on the subject any better than anyone else's?
Well, can you think of any other source, any source that you have been made aware of, any source that you've heard of, where some person outside the investigative team on this case would have been able to link up the left arm of Julie Jensen with the injuries on the chest wall?
Objection.
She hasn't heard all the evidence in this case.
So stay.
Well, prior to having been presented with Erin Dillard's statement, had you yourself ever looked at that photograph that was taken of Julie Jensen in her bedroom at the time that she was discovered and compared it to the injuries that were described in Dr. Chambliss's autopsy report?
No.
So it wasn't until after you'd heard of Erin Dillard's statement that you did that?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Mainland, based upon your entire examination of the entire file in this case, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not the history and the evidence in this case is consistent with a single dose of ethylene glycol or more than a single dose of ethylene glycol?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
That it's more consistent with multiple doses.
And are multiple doses of ethylene glycol consistent with a suicide or a homicide?
If I had to choose,
Objection to the foundation of this witness's expertise in that area.
Sustained.
Well, have you had occasion, doctor, to examine ethylene glycol cases, either ones that you've examined yourself or have been examined by others, where there was a suicide by ethylene glycol?
yes.
And have you examined the findings in ethylene glycol cases where it was a homicide by ethylene glycol?
Yes, and I must tell the jury right away that none of those were my personal cases because it's a rare occurrence.
And what were you able to compare the typical amount of ethylene glycol in a suicide versus the typical amount of ethylene glycol in a homicide? Or are there any differences between those two? Or
I object to foundation. I don't think limited anecdotal evidence is sufficient to form an opinion.
Between your experience and what you've learned by examining the cases of others, would that be the kind of information you would rely upon ordinarily in your exercise of your professional duties?
Yes, I took it into consideration.
It's overruled.
so what lessons have you learned or drawn from those?
I have observed that both in suicide and accidental cases that, we didn't bring up accidental, did we?
But whatever your observations are, just tell us if you think they're relevant to your findings in this case.
All right, we'll stick to suicide for the moment. In suicidal cases of ethylene glycol poisoning, the person usually takes a big dose and gets sick pretty rapidly and dies. It's not typical for a suicide case with ethylene glycol to take a big dose, linger for a couple days, and then die unless they get to the hospital and get some treatment.
And I object and move to strike on lack of foundation for that opinion.
Overruled.
And what have you discerned with respect to ethylene glycol homicide cases?
There's not a whole lot, I'm going to say first of all, there's not a whole lot in the medical literature about ethylene glycol homicide cases, so some of what I have learned is either through talking to my colleagues informally, or I've got to admit, over the internet. A smaller dose would be more typical.
And why is that? Do you have any inferences you draw as to why it'd be a smaller amount in a homicide than it would be in a suicide?
It's kind of stands to reason that if you're trying to poison somebody with something, you don't want them to know it. So you're not going to give them a half a gallon of antifreeze, or you're not going to give them a cup of antifreeze with a little coffee in it. You can give them a cup of coffee with some antifreeze in it.
No. You indicated that the history in this case is consistent with, well, how many, more than one dose of ethylene glycol, and how is it that you've come to that conclusion?
Because of mainly, because of the fact, well, all right, do you want history, do you want toxicology, do you want it all?
I want the basis for your opinion. So anything that supports that conclusion, anything that you considered that was inconsistent with that conclusion, I want you to tell the jury your reasoning process that got you to the conclusion that there was more than one dose of ethylene glycol in this case.
Okay, Mrs. Jensen started exhibiting symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning sometime in the overnight hours of between December 1st and December 2nd. When you take a dose of ethylene glycol, the symptoms can appear within about from 30 minutes to as long as 12 hours later. And a lot of that depends on the size of the dose. So it's, to me, it's clear that she had a dose of ethylene glycol sometime on the evening or maybe even late afternoon of December 1st. Now, if she'd only had a single dose, ethylene glycol gets absorbed and processed by the body very quickly. Yet she was still alive on the afternoon of December 3rd. That's roughly 48 hours later. When she died, she had unprocessed ethylene glycol in her body. It was in her blood. It was in her brain. It was in her liver. It was also in her urine, but some of it does get excreted unprocessed anyway. So that leads me to believe that there was more than one dose. We also have that. I guess that's what part of what led me to my initial conclusion. And then we have a statement from Aaron Dillard that supports that.
Now, were you aware of any statements concerning Julie Jensen's condition on Wednesday, December 2nd, the day preceding her death?
The only things yes, I am. I'm aware.
Okay, tell us what you know, what you've learned from the evidence concerning Julie Jensen's condition on Wednesday, December 2nd, the day before she died.
Well, the source of this is, again, there's Aaron Dillard's statement, and then there's a conversation or two that occurred between Mark Jensen and Julie's brother, Paul. And-
Objection.
Sustained.
Well, based upon that information, though, what did you learn in terms of Julie Jensen's condition on Wednesday, December 2nd?
Judge, may I report?
Let's take a break. Please don't talk about the case.
Please, all right.
Mr. Albee?
Judge, Paul Griffin was taping conversations with Mr. Jensen not under the color of law. They're not admissible in this trial. I don't think they're permissible to be relied upon by Dr. Mainland.
Well, but she can rely on, if he, are you saying he cannot testify?
I guess it's, at the moment, maybe it's unclear, but there are transcripts of those telephone calls that are at least in my file and perhaps Dr. Mainland's, and her reliance on those transcripts, I think, is impermissible.
Well, I think
Because those are not admissible in court.
well, the fact that they're not admissible in court may not necessarily mean that the physician can't rely on them.
I think they do, otherwise it would completely undermine the policy basis for preventing their admissibility in court. Because what choice do I have but then to cross-examine about them, and then it's opening the door and you get into the content of the conversations that are inadmissible in court. Our legislature is
No, the
determined-
conversation's not inadmissible. The tape recording is inadmissible.
But I think she's relying on transcripts of the tape recording.
But the witness is here and available for your cross-examination if you wanted. So that, to me, that removes the curse that's on the statements because they were tape recorded in a manner non-compliant with the law.
I don't think the problem or the policy reason behind their exclusion from a court of law.
When you say there, you're talking about the recordings.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Yes, I am. But you can't backdoor. You can't. No more than the witness himself could read from a transcript of the recording or look at, if he testifies from his memory or whatever, fine. But and maybe we could just ask Dr. Mainland this question. Dr. Mainland, are you relying on the transcripts?
Objection's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
Oh, I don't think so.
If the witness were not here, because if she says, let me start over. In the presence of the jury, if she says, I'm relying on what Paul Griffin said, that the defendant said, you have the opportunity to call Paul Griffin to the stand and show that Paul Griffin did not make that statement.
But I'm in a quagmire because the cross-examination would deal with the particulars of the tape. And
It wouldn't necessarily have to, and if it did, the prohibition of the law is what it is. And frankly, there are people, intelligent people, who think that the law goes way too far and actually acts aggressively to suppress truth. But whether that's true or not true, all the law says is that the transcripts, or the recordings are not admissible. I know of no authority for the proposition that a living person who can come up here, take an oath, and swear to tell the truth can't testify to what happens. And I understand you have to be wary on cross-examination. If you ask the wrong question, like how do you know are you sure that statement was made, and how can you be so sure? And he says, because I got a tape recording of it. You're stuck with it, but
And I don't think I can be. I think this undermines the policy behind that
No,
statute.
I don't agree with
and
you.
And the court's certainly right. Some people think that's a bad law, but the key word there is law. It is a law.
I agree, and that's why we will not hear the recordings in the court.
Well, I object to that. The other thing I had an earlier objection to, Judge, is this case has been pending for 6 years, and nobody can give me a summary of the expert's opinion. It doesn't matter whether it's a huge surprise, a medium surprise, or anything else. I have received no notice that this witness would come and testify that this is a suffocation. I have an absolute right to that under 971-23, under State v. Revels, R-E-V-E-L-S, that I am supposed to get notice as to what the witness's opinions will be and something about the basis for that opinion so I can prepare. And it says nothing about how big of a surprise it is. I am somewhat surprised based on her testimony in August that it's now a suffocation death, but I received no notice, I received no summary, and the witness's opinions on that basis should not be admitted here.
Well, I will tell you that I would, even if I were to buy into your theory, and I don't want to say I don't, I don't want to approach it unless I have to, but even if I were to accept your proposition, you're not going to get a suppression of the evidence. What you'll get is an adjournment to deal with the fact that you didn't have prior notice, if I accept the proposition that you weren't on notice.
Right.
So do you need more time?
I may. Maybe we'll have it over the weekend, but I think notice serves more than the purpose of just being prepared. I mean, it's advance notice for how you're going to try the whole case. It's advance notice for how I conduct my cross-examination of Dr. Long. It's advance notice for how I'm going to conduct a cross-examination of Dr. Chambliss.
You know, I have to tell you, Mr. Albee, and I mean no disrespect, but you'd have to have been in a different courtroom not to know this was coming.
Well, you know, when a witness testifies in August that she doesn't see it being an asphyxiation death, and I have great respect for Dr. Mainland, so, you know, I'm not saying she was, you know, it's not like Dr. Chambliss, who I think came up with an opinion in some short period of time or anything like that, but still, you get notice, and it's not just what the opinion will be, but Revels says, I get to know some of the underlying basis for what she's going to testify to, what things she's going to key on. I wouldn't have known, for example, that she would key on the rib injuries as opposed to the petechiae in the lungs or the heart or something like that, or that she would key on this bruise, which I am somewhat surprised about. So it is more than just, this is her opinion, and I shouldn't be surprised, but it's also a summary of what that basis for that opinion would be, is what I think is required by Revels.
All right, what we'll do is we're going
May I
to
respond just briefly, Your Honor?
we're going to take the remainder of the jury break, and you gentlemen can think about this, you can confer about it, and if you're still in disagreement about it, when in 7 minutes, when we come back, then I'll hear your response.
Well, I think that...
No, I think that's the best idea.
Okay.
All right, 7 minutes.
I'll just say this,
2
Judge.
o'clock.
I was as surprised as anybody about the testimony regarding the
2 o'clock.
bruise on the buttocks.
2
I didn't know she was
o'clock.
going to say that.
2 o'clock. Why don't you tell him that in a friendly... My looking at it in terms of whether the defense is going to suffer some prejudice from this, you have not sold me. And I'm open to your doing so, in which case I'll take whatever measures are necessary to ensure that the defendant is treated fairly, and if that means doctor has to come back another time, we'll do that. But I'm not going to do that unless you have an adequate showing that the intent of the statute has not been satisfied.
And Your Honor, if I just make a brief record on this point about linking up the photograph of Julie Jensen in the bedroom and comparing it to the injuries that were described in Dr. Chambliss's report, that is something which I did for the first time myself without showing the jury. I saw that connection while Mr. Albee was cross-examining Dr. Chambliss. That's really the first time I looked at that photograph, looked at those injuries, and I thought, my God, they line up perfectly. And so that's when when this came out on Dr. Chambliss, it came out on redirect examination, not on the direct examination. It was the redirect examination. And it was on the redirect examination that Dr. Chambliss offered the opinion for the first time that the cause of death in this case was asphyxiation. That secondary cause was ethylene glycol poisoning, but that the cause of death was asphyxiation. And it was after he was shown for the first time the crime scene photo And then, not only that crime scene photo, but the other crime scene photo showing Julie Jensen's mouth and nose shoved off to one side, which I haven't gotten to with this witness yet. He came to an opinion right there in the courtroom. And so he didn't get advance notice of that because it happened right there in the courtroom. Now, I never had this doctor link up those photos. I mean, I don't recall ever showing her this photo until today. Did I show it to you before? I don't remember if I have or not. But
Which
the
photo?
The photo of Julie in bed with her arm.
I don't want to take any more time in this discussion. Up to this point, Mr. Albee hasn't presented me with any showing of prejudice. What I'm going to do, we're going to continue and complete the examination of Dr. Mainland, and if Mr. Albee can make either this afternoon, if he can't make a showing this afternoon, I'll even allow him till Monday, and if he shows me on Monday that the defense has suffered prejudice as a result of this absence of prior disclosure, and if I adopt his belief that there's noncompliance with the statute, then we'll simply have doctor come back and he can have a continued cross.
Okay.
Okay?
And it may be that to have until Monday would be sufficient.
Well, I'm not saying I'll have doctor come back on Monday. I'm saying I'll rule Monday on whether, if you make such a request on Monday, I'll keep it open, and if I'm convinced of both that you are not given that notice required by law and that there's prejudice, then we'll just arrange to have doctor come back another time. Okay? Ask the jury to come in, please.